Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Pagano, and I'm the board advisor for Hera, and I'm also the founder of Hera TV as well. And I have a really awesome opportunity to talk to Nina Aouilk, and she has an amazing background, and she's on a mission to help women around the world. And I want to let her share her story. So Nina, let me ask you a question. Tell me about how you got started. How was your life in your early years?
In my early years. So I was born a girl into an Indian culture, and girls are not wanted in my culture. Most of Asia and Africa don't actually like having girls. So in my particular culture, which is Indian, my parents came from India in the 1960s. They brought with them their cultural idealisms and restraints. And most girls are killed at birth. People don't even know when a woman's pregnant because they will actually kill the baby within the house and maybe even bury the child in the garden in England.
Wow. Now, where in India was your family from? What part of India?
Yeah, my parents are actually Punjabi, which is the north of India.
Okay.
But this problem is wide scale across India. It's not any better in any particular part or worse in any part. I would say 75% of Asians, Koreans, Chinese, Mauritian, there's a lot of places around Asia that have the same sort of idealism that girls are really not wanted. In India, they leave the girls underneath trucks, hoping that the trucks will run over the girls without seeing them. And a lot of truck drivers don't know the girl's been left underneath their tires unless the girl's crying, I guess. But it's horrific to think that it's still going on in today's date, but it's literally happening every day around the world. And a lot of people think the problem is far away from them, but you have to remember that Indian people live everywhere across the world. Chinese, Korean people live everywhere across the world. Africans from different parts of Africa, particularly in the north, live in different parts of the world. So their traditions have been taken with them, their idealisms have been taken with them, and you won't even know. The data will be very little because these things are hidden and nobody really finds out what's happening. So for me, as a child, I wasn't allowed to interact with my brothers I had two brothers or my father. I was the youngest of three. By the age of 6, I was a servant, and I would only come down the stairs when they would call me to cook or to clean or just any menial duty that needed doing, I would do it.
Wow. Wow. And how did your brothers treat you? Were they nice to you, or were they abusive?
Yeah, so my whole childhood was very mentally and physically abusive. I was the one that would be kicked for no reason, or I hadn't picked up the plate, or the fork had fallen on the floor. And you've got to imagine a young child trying to pick up a whole family's worth of plates in one go because they didn't want me to be seen. I used to drop a lot of things, and I still do. So it's a habit that's not gone away, unfortunately. And I was quite clumsy. I think when you're stressed, you become a little bit clumsier. Right. So I would constantly be winded. By winded, I mean they would punch me or kick me in the stomach or in the chest, and I just wouldn't be able to catch my breath.
Wow. Did you go to school? Were you allowed to go to school?
I was allowed to go to school, which was my escape, because although I went to school a very dirty child with not many friends in a very predominantly white area, I was bullied at school, but it was nothing in comparison to what was happening at home. Being spat on or my hair being pulled was very minor in comparison to what I was actually having to deal with at home. And for me, abuse became very normal. It became just life. I didn't know any different. How would I know it was so wrong? So my school years were not so traumatic, but the best thing about school was I was allowed to take books home, and I had nothing in my room other than a mattress. It was actually a bed, but the mattress had no bedding. And it was a very bare room, a very cold room, but I had books. So I would play with the books. I would read the books. The books would be my friends. I would even name the books.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And, I became very imaginative with books. I would even make little towers of the books and pretend that Rapunzel was at the top and I was Rapunzel. But from a very young age, I've read lots and lots of books. It's one of my things to do.
Well, a great opportunity to learn and kind of escape from your situation. I would imagine you started to realize that what was happening to you wasn't necessarily normal.
I didn't realize what was happening to me was not normal until the age of 14, which is quite old, but I think I was very naive. I think even for my age now, I'm still quite naive in the sense of I'm learning still how society lives on a normal basis. It's like being trapped in a under cellar, under house cellar. Like we've seen people are held hostage and they come out and they find it really hard to adjust. There is an adjustment period. So I'm still learning very much. I still haven't been to Starbucks. It's still something on my list. I want my name written on the cup. Little things like this are still very big to me, and there'll be nothing to anybody else. But for me, they're huge. At the age of 14, unfortunately, I was called downstairs one evening. My father had returned from the pub, as we call it, or the bar, maybe as you call it there. He'd brought back lots of his jolly friends. They were all making a lot of noise. And there was probably 7 or 8 of them. And it was my job then I was woken up by my mother, who went back to sleep, to say, go and cook for your father and his friends. So, I was there rustling up chicken and rice and all whatever they wanted. But then my job was and I want you to sort of envisage this. I was a 14-year-old half asleep, sitting on the bottom step of a large staircase, waiting for them to finish so that I could clear it, because that was part of my job to do. They didn't want dirty dishes. Unfortunately, when I went to pick up the tray of dirty dishes, they took away my innocence. The very hands that were supposed to protect me held me down, and I kept my eyes closed. I didn't know who did what. And I only admitted this to myself in February because it was just so traumatic. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
But yeah, so I didn't want to ever really face it. So a lot of the things I learned as I was growing up to let go of and not hold on to, but this particular thing was so wrong. It just felt very wrong. And that's when I knew my life wasn't normal.
Yeah. Were you ever able to talk about it to your mom and dad about how wrong this was? Or was it just silence?
I wasn't allowed to talk about it. And I think, this is one thing that I would love to be able to normalize, the talking about it, the admitting, because if you have been in that abusive situation, you feel shame and guilt and you feel a stigma. But if we were able to say to young girls that it's okay to talk about it, we want you to talk about it, just like we talk about depression more openly now, then the perpetrators of such acts would stop. They would think twice because they would have more of a consequence. And one of my new things since last year has been, if somebody does something wrong, I will call them out on it, because how will they know otherwise? How will they know that they're doing something wrong? So I never ever spoke to my parents about it, but I did get pregnant by one of the men, maybe even my father, I don't know. But they took me at the age of I was just turning 15 to have an abortion. And I remember sitting there with a lot of other people, and I knew I was underage. I knew things had been said in the hospital. Well, it wasn't a hospital, it was a private clinic. But things were being said, and I understood that this was a very, very wrong situation. But you see, again, I wasn't protected. They could have done something. And the teachers at school, when I came back, I felt very lost. I was withdrawn. I wasn't really a socializing child anyway, but my grades were dropping. I was very bright, and my grades had dropped, but nobody ever picked up on that. And that's why I want the awareness not to be just of my plight, for the fact that girls are killed for no reason, for not enough reason, I would say, right. But also for people to say, look, if you see something that's wrong, teachers can make your life a better place, because teachers, they have such an influence on young minds. And I know so many people where a teacher has said to them, you're not stupid, you can do well, where the parents have been negative and the teacher's given that person a whole new directive and changed the whole idealism of how they should live their lives, and they've become very successful. So it just sometimes takes that person to recognize that you're in pain. And I cried a lot, and I was never a crying child. I was always very happy in my own little life, not understanding too much that was going on. But that particular year, I was in a really bad way.
Was there more abuse after that? I mean, obviously your father, antagonized it, right? I mean, he didn't protect you. I hope he didn't hold you down, but maybe he did. But
Yeah.
did more of that happen right immediately right after?
So I think because I did get pregnant, the consequence was, it maybe put them off, but he
Okay.
didn't ever abuse me again. The only abuse I had was physical abuse because I tried to kill myself. I took an overdose and they beat me to literally, they just kicked me in my stomach continuously, all of them, both of my brothers and my mother and my father. So I was unable to move from the landing, the stairs landing. I just lay there for days, unable to move.
Wow. So I understand that you were married as well. And tell me
So
how that was.
yeah, so the way the marriage came about is at 16 you have an arranged marriage, but with my situation being slightly different, not being a virgin, it was difficult. So my father made an agreement with one of the men that had raped me that I would go to his house and be married to his son, with the understanding that his son would have nothing to do with me because his son already had a girlfriend, and she wasn't Indian, but the father had allowed him to, boys are allowed more to do things than girls are. So when I arrived at the house on my marital night, I was given a little room downstairs and they had bedrooms upstairs, and my room was a tiny little cupboard hole. It was little, it was ever so little, barely big enough to put a bed and a tiny wardrobe. And I stayed there for 4 years, but I got tired and fed up of continuously pushing my father-in-law off me and his molestation. And, he would put his hands into my clothes and I just felt dirty all the time. But I'd started a job, so I had more external influences and I was always protected from those influences. And I met people and they seemed really nice. And people would say, "You've got a bruise on your face, you shouldn't be allowing this." I never told anybody what my father-in-law was doing, but they knew I was always quite a scared person when it came to going home. I never really wanted to go.
Wow. Wow. So so you talked about how you left the marriage and what had happened with your mom and dad when you came back. Can you share that story?
Sure. So I didn't know what to do. It was actually one particular day that I'd got back from work early, and it was just myself and my father-in-law in the house. And they used to do some really weird things like tie my ankles with coat hangers, so that if I moved, the coat hanger would dig into my skin. And that was so that if they went out to a wedding, that I wouldn't leave. So they used to sort of do these things to me. But around the corner, people were being killed. Brides that had given daughters to the families were being burnt by petrol being poured over them,
Hmm.
and they were being set alight. And the police were being told that they were committing suicide. But the idea of that was that they could go and get another bride for their son in the hope that she would provide a son as opposed to a girl.
Hmm.
And because of that, it was quite a scary time. And I thought that might happen to me. I was very scared of that
Right.
because I hadn't supplied any children, because I wasn't having any relationship with my husband. And the only child that would be provided would have been through his father. And I didn't want that myself. So with that, I mustered up enough courage to escape to my parents, thinking now that I'm 21, I just barely turned 21, that they would look after me and I would explain that my father-in-law was trying to rape me. But when I arrived, my father just grabbed me by my hair and dragged me through the house. He threw me literally onto the floor and I was bouncing off the walls because my father's an ex-wrestler. My brother was 6 foot, he's 6 foot tall. I was quite a frail thing because I had an eating disorder, because I just never believed in eating because no one really allowed me to eat. So I was quite frail and weak. My brother broke my jaw and my arm. And then when I collapsed, they stamped on me until they broke my hip. And I was in a really, really bad state. And I remember watching the blood literally trickle off my face and looking at the design it was making on the carpet, thinking, do I want to live? and something in me wanted to live, but I didn't know how I would get through it.
Wow. And you did.
I did, and that's called an honor killing. They were trying to kill me because, my father, whilst beating me, was saying that you've brought shame to our family. Who are you seeing? I wasn't seeing anybody, but they were saying things like, how can we show our face in the community? What can we do with you? The plan was to send me to India to finish me off, but
Mm.
I did run away. I literally crawled away because I was in such a bad state.
Wow. So how do you how did you get to the other side of all this? Were you, yeah.
Yeah. So that after 2 days, I didn't come about. I didn't really. I think I was unconscious for quite a long time, and I remember barely starting to walk, but my hip felt. The arm and the jaw weren't too bad, but my hip was in a really bad way, and I used to crawl around the house literally to try to go to the toilet and things. And my father said that we were going to India, that I should sit up straight and I should stand up straight. And he literally forced me to try to stand. He told me we were going to India, but someone had sort of said that if you go to India, go to security. It was a family, and one of my mum's friends, like an auntie that's not an auntie. So I thought, well, if I get to the airport and I've got my father on one side and my mother on the other, I'm not going to have the courage to say, help me. I won't be able to do it. I won't be able to do it. So I figured I had to run away. So somehow I got to a local park and I hid in the park, and I watched my father driving back and forth, and I was really scared. But when daylight broke, I went to one of the people that said he would help me from work. I knew that he liked me, and I didn't really think much of him, but I knew he was a kind person. So I'd said to him from work, it would, if I needed somewhere, he said I could go. But when I got there, he wasn't there. I ended up at the police, and then I ended up in the hospital. After the hospital, I ended up in a women's refuge where I couldn't stay there. It was too depressive, and I started to want to end my life because the people around me were so negative. And I went to my friend who said, you can stay here, there's a spare room, and that's where I stayed. But we went out together to somebody's birthday. I'd never drank in my life, never touched Malibu rum ever again either, but I ended up getting pregnant, and that for me changed my life because I had a girl. So I broke the narrative because I was celebrating my child. I promised her I would give her everything I never had, and something clicked in my mindset to say, work hard, you can do whatever you can do to get this girl to be an independent, successful woman so that she can break this cultural curse almost that was bestowed upon me. And that she gave me life. But unfortunately, my partner was also very abusive. I literally went from frying pan to fire.
Oh no. Wow. So so now you've left that relationship, I assume.
Yeah, so I didn't leave the relationship because I wanted to, because when you've been through abuse and mental abuse all your life, you don't know any different.
Right.
I stayed with him for 23 years, and I got pregnant shortly after my daughter. 5 years later, I had my son, my first son. He's wonderful. And then I got pregnant again quite quickly. I wasn't using any contraception, but that child, I was 8 months pregnant, and my former partner pushed me down the stairs.
Oh.
So when I got to the hospital, my baby died shortly after birth. And then I found that really, really difficult because I was in a ward, a hospital ward, where everyone's having babies that are crying, and mine wasn't. He didn't make any noise, and he was a real baby. And that sounds stupid me saying, but he was a baby, with his hands and feet, and not like you imagined people losing a baby. You think it's not a fully sized baby, but he was, I believe he's my angel. But it was a difficult year. And then I ended up having my third child, my fourth child, my youngest son, who's gorgeous, and he's with me now. But I left the relationship because my daughter had gone off to university. My middle son I sent to boarding school. I'm really quite entrepreneurial, so I'd just open a new business to pay for whatever I needed to pay for. I sent him there because his father and him had had a clash because he was sticking up for me as my protector. because they get to an age where they understand things are wrong and they try to protect you as a mother. So I sent him off thinking it was the right thing to do. And as parents, we do what we think is right. But that had a huge effect on my youngest son, because he was suddenly left with all the abuse himself, without his buffer, without his friend. And he ended up getting really sick with an autoimmune disease. He went to hospital. His father just didn't want to visit him, which really affected him. They said that his autoimmune disease is referenced as a disability. So with that stigma of the word disability, his father had said that he's obviously not my son in front of him, which really affected him at the age of 13. And then one day, my daughter got a message on a phone message. It was a photo of, I was asleep and so was my youngest son. And she was 200 miles away. She was panicking because the message had the words, "I'm sorry," underneath. And I was asleep. My son was asleep, but it was midday. And she knew that I didn't sleep because it was midday, but apart from that, a few years before, he'd set my pillow on fire as I was sleeping. So insomnia and I had become best friends. I just did not sleep. And when I woke up, she rang every phone in the house. When I woke up, I realized the house was full of gas because he'd left the taps on in the kitchen. So it was literally a bomb waiting to go off, I guess. But that day, my son spoke out at school. When he went back to school, he spoke out, and he was brave to do so, because I think I was too scared to do anything. And when he spoke out, we were removed really quickly. We were put into emergency accommodation. And I don't know how it works in America, but here you literally get put anywhere. It was 20 miles away. It wasn't very far, but the place that we moved to, it was very in a bad condition. The carpet was full of human urine and the walls had human feces smeared on them, and it really got to the back of your throat. And when I got there, I thought to myself, what am I doing? You know, maybe I should go back because it's more comfortable, and he's ill. How can I have him here? And we hadn't taken anything. We weren't allowed to take any money. We were allowed to take cash, but when you've given literally 20 minutes to leave, you don't know what to pick up first. Do I take clothes? We took nothing. We literally walked out what we had on. I wrapped my coat around my son that night and lay him down because he was mentally exhausted. There was no electricity or gas. I didn't know how to use the card system. I had no cash to put onto the card system. And I sat in the other room. It's the first time I cried properly for a long time. I think I cried for myself as a child. I cried for myself as a woman growing up and not having support from my mother whilst I was bringing my own children into the world. I cried for letting my children down because I felt I'd let them down. I cried for a woman who just wanted to be loved. And I looked down, and I'm not lying, Mary, there was literally puddles of tears on my clothes. And I said to myself, you can either drown in these tears or you can dance. And something in me made me stand up. I don't know why. I stood up and I just started to bounce up and down. It sounds odd, but I said to myself, look, you're one step closer to freedom. You're one step closer to that new life. Make a plan and make it happen. And the temporary accommodation's temporary. So we did become homeless 5.5 years ago. And somebody, eventually she opened her doors to us. I call her an angel, Nikki. She opened her doors to us. And when I got into the house, I worked out how much money I needed. As I was explaining the other day on Clubhouse, I knew that I needed so many thousand to pay for this property because I had to pay up front, not being employed. So I worked out how much I needed on a daily basis, and I cleaned people's houses, I nannied, I looked after, I did people's admin, anything that needed doing. Nothing was, as long as it had integrity, I would do. And within a month, I was able to move. The only problem is when I moved, my son had this problem of going from one extreme to another, and it's called adjustment disorder. And I'm not sure where he got the money from, but he ran away to Miami. And it was like finding a needle in a haystack because he'd romanticized killing himself. So he tried to buy a gun. He'd booked a hotel room for one night. And his idea was to shoot himself. And he'd left us with a horrific video that I can't watch. I didn't watch. And a letter that I've never screamed like that in my life. I screamed and cried literally for a few minutes. Then I had to almost shout at myself, my inner voice saying, stop and find him and bring him back. And we tracked him through Snapchat, we tracked him through social media. And in the end, we managed to speak to him. He actually answered the phone, and I promised him that if he came back, I would just let him be. And that's another reason why I'm very much speaking out about mental health and how sometimes our children are crying out for help, but we're too busy in our own little worlds trying to resolve. My issue was I need to buy him a bed. I've got this house, but I've no furniture. Maybe I could buy a second-hand bed from somewhere, or maybe someone's giving a bed away, or a mattress just for him to be comfortable. We had a sofa that he slept on.
Mhm.
I wasn't actually listening to him when he said things to me. I was ignoring him because I was so caught up in my own world. And we need to, as parents, really hear our children and what they're telling us, because they are dependent on us. We brought them into this world, and we are responsible. I have let go of the guilt now, but I carried guilt about this for a while. And this February, 3 years later, he said goodnight to me just the day before my birthday. But I allowed him to have his space. I set some boundaries, but I allowed him to have his own room, space, and time. I've not pushed him to do anything. I've not forced mental health medicine upon him, because I don't believe in that myself. I'm very much holistic. I have made his diet very healthy. I've tried my best to encourage him to exercise. But I think sometimes when you are in that place, I'm guessing because I don't know how he feels, too many voices don't allow you to hear your own voice. And I think when I tried to kill myself, I just wanted it to end because of the voices around me. So I tried to give him that calmness and love him from afar. And now I've given him a purpose. I've tried to give him a responsibility. So hopefully, with time and patience, we'll maybe see the old him back.
Yep. Yep. So do you think that you're healed and that you're on the other side of all this?
I do believe 2 years ago I found me. I don't know me very well. I'm finding more about myself,
Yeah.
because as the way I've grown up, I've always liked what my children have liked to eat, or what my children want to watch, or the music they've wanted to hear. I've had little bits of time, little bits of freedom where I've been able to choose myself, but I've never really had that time for me. And I've never loved me because everyone said I was unlovable. So how could I love me? But 2 years ago, sorry, excuse me. So 2 years ago, I actually found myself, and I love myself, and I really, really do. And when you find who you are, and I realized everything I'd gone through was deliberate. I was supposed to go through that because I'm not sure if I'm 100% religious, but I know there's a force, there's a God, and we all have our own ways of worshipping God. Some people worship him in a church, some people worship in a mosque or a temple like my parents. But regardless of how you worship God, he is within us. He's within you, he's within this chair, he's all around us, and we should celebrate that. And that made me feel very loved inside, because I went through the abuse as a child, so I could reach out to a child and really care for them. I went through the abuse as a woman growing up with the domestic violence, so I could understand somebody else. How would I understand them? And I almost feel like I've been educated in life in a different way to other people, but that makes me feel special. I don't feel a victim. I feel like a warrior princess. I actually do. And I am really, really full of love. Everybody I meet, I want to give them a hug and pass on this love, because I believe in a domino effect, that if I'm nice to you, Mary, that you will go out and meet somebody else and you'll be nice to them, because I've put you in that happy mood, that loving mood, and told you how wonderful and beautiful you are, and you will maybe pass that on. And that's what the world, I feel, really needs. But I am healed. I'm still coming to terms with the fact that a father would not protect his daughter as a parent. I find that difficult. But it was February, I've really accepted that, and I just need to allow that to go too.
Yep. Sometimes people don't know how to love, but yeah, I'm extremely proud of what you're up to, and the voice that you are, right? So tell me about the things that you're doing now to be able to give
Yeah.
service to others to help them in regards to, your past experience.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, so I'm very much an advocate now. I'm working with Think Network, who are an empowerment platform, and I'm working with them as a cultural diversity advocate. My heart really wants for me to reach out to speak on platforms, even to have a book which I will write, to have a film made about my life, so that I can infiltrate literally everybody everywhere for this awareness that I'm trying to create. And the awareness isn't for me, it's for other people to understand what an honor killing is, what it's like to be born a girl into an Asian culture where you're not wanted, and that life is not precious, whereas any child is precious, and life is a gift. For maybe even an app to be made, which I keep talking about, that I have this dream, and I want this to be a reality, that there's an app made which is like a chameleon that changes. Somebody pointed that out the other day, that it needs to change. So for that app to change, and the girl clicks on it, and for people to go and collect her, to be waiting in a car somewhere that is, she knows where, they wait for her for 2 hours a gap, and she can make her way there, and that they care for her before they help her, hand her over to social services or wherever she needs to go. But I also want women to be in this car service, like a safe car. I want the women that have been in abusive relationships, because I feel they're very empathetic and loving, the ones that have healed and that are on the other side, that want to also give back to. Because when I left home, I was given, somebody was allocated to us from Women's Aid in this country. She'd come out of the university with a degree, but she had no life skills, she had no empathy, she had no way of really communicating those interpersonal skills. Whereas I know that if I come into contact with someone, the first thing I want to do is love them and hug them. So if I could have that kind of person all over the world, everywhere, and there's these cars literally that go and pick the girls up and just stays with them for 2 hours, and then gives them a box. I've got all these ideas, a box that I ask people to donate, a toothbrush, a brush, a comb, hair bands, just little things for them to have on that first night. Pajamas, we didn't have anything. And then they go away and they can hopefully start their life again, with workshops to enable them to learn how to live alone.
Yeah. Well, the statistics of women being abused is extremely high around the world. It's almost like 3 out of 4. It's really ridiculous, and it's usually done by family members, and it's quiet. People don't talk about it. I think that the more voices that we hear from in regards to that, violence against women needs to stop. There's countries that are selling their little girls, right? So it's a horrible issue. Hera, I mean, what we are about in Hera is uplifting women around the world. The value of the women is extremely important to us, equality, all those things. And we are building a city for the future of humanity, for all genders, all nationalities, all religions, with a strong, focus in honor of women, because women have amazing EQ skills that will help us in our journey going forward outside of COVID. It's because we nurture children, we take care of family, we take care of communities. Women have amazing skill sets to do that. So my question for you is, in regards to Hera City, what do you think would be important in that city for women around the world?
Yeah, I mean, what you've just told me is your vision for the future is exceptionally amazing, and I'm so pleased that somebody's wanting to do this. I'm not a feminist. I'm very much somebody against discrimination and injustice. I would love for Hera City to be involved with that. I would love to be involved, or I would love somebody at Hera City to be involved with helping those that are discriminated against, whether they be female or male. The injustice that cultural restraints impose upon people, for this cultural loop to just be broken, and for the new generation to be re-educated with new learning that life is precious regardless of who you are. and to give that respect to women, because they are needed. And if we keep getting rid of all the women, then we have no future, and that's what's happening in Asia, where men of 45 are marrying 14-year-olds to have children because there's hardly any women around. So I would absolutely dream if Hera City could be involved in my vision too, and include what's so important to me, what's driving me. I feel it's my purpose.
Mm. Nina, I am so excited that you shared this story, and nobody can tell it like you because you've lived it. And I'm so grateful that you're on the other side of it. And I'm so grateful that you're the voice of making change. So thank you so much for this interview. It's a pleasure to know you, to meet you, and I will promote your work as much as possible.
Thank
So
you so much.
thank you, my
So
dear.
much. Thank you.
Okay.